Recording this now as the attendees come on board, top of the hour. And yeah, thanks for an incredible panel. This conversation happened, really within about a couple of days. I passed the email over to Craig O'Kane with the Office of the Chief Entrepreneur's Office saying, hey, look, we're having a bit of focus this week on this transformation we're seeing across Australia in regards to personal protective equipment, manufacturing. Almost every industry obviously has been disrupted in some way because of COVID-19, but we've seen manufacturing transform and respond. Across all areas, everything from makerspaces to anyone with a 3D printer, all the way up to major manufacturing. We had a conversation yesterday with some makers and some manufacturers saying, what does this look like? How do we coordinate better? And one of the topics that came up is transformation around procurement, because it's all well and good for us to make it, but how do we actually get it from printer to patient? And one of the other things that's been hitting the airwaves and the social media recently is the transformational work that's being done within Queensland, particularly around supply chains, procurement processes, and making this whole process go a lot faster. So what we want to do is have a conversation here, both within government and with industry, and bring some of the panelists from yesterday to continue the conversation to really deeply understand and say, also one of the narratives that's coming up is we're doing a lot of stuff immediately to respond, but what are the things we're doing now that are actually going to sustain? And what's going to be embedded as far as resilience moving forward across different sectors, including manufacturing. So to facilitate that, we've got a pretty incredible panel here today. We have Leanne Kemp, who's the Queensland Chief Entrepreneur with the Office of the Chief Entrepreneur with the Queensland Government, Bill Walker, Department of State Development, Michael Swart from Industry Capability Network Queensland, and Shay Chalmers, Strategic Engineering Australia. We also have Tony Wheeler, who's been working on a way to how do we bring the manufacturing capability, particularly within the smaller manufacturers, together as a single voice. And then Ty Hermans with one of the dominant manufacturing facilities within Queensland, Australia, who's done some incredible transformation over the last couple of weeks in order to rapidly facilitate delivery of PPE. So we're going to hear from the four panelists I introduced first initially, and then we're going to pass it over to an open Q&A and then open up as well for Ty and Tony to chime in. For the attendees who are online, please feel free to comment amongst yourselves among the chat. And if you want to ask any questions, the Q&A is open. Feel free to upvote different questions that come through, and we'll have a bit of a more broad conversation as we go. So I might just open up initially to Leanne to give a bit of a briefing on what you've been seeing and a bit of an update, because I know you've been having a few conversations around some of the manufacturing transformation that we've been seeing.
So, I mean, Queensland is leading the charge. When I think about if there's a race to the start line around COVID, Queensland was the first to jump onto the running track, which is always great. We have incredible capability across the entirety of the state, and I do think that we've been able to enact with many interactions in government to not pivot, in fact, actually pirouette, as I've been saying in my keynote at Code. This sort of cantering pirouette, which is a two-step movement, enables us to be able to bring the power of our manufacturing to the forefront of the demand curves, and there is demand that is needed, whether that be in PPE or in sanitizers, etc., and even medical equipment. But I'll wind the time back a number of months. So as well as Queensland's Chief Entrepreneur and the Global Chair for the World Economic Forum for Advanced Manufacturing. And we saw and understand in my role as the Chief, where could Queensland lead? Where could we be the flag bearer globally? And it was very quick period of time, probably about 6 months into the role, that I was able to say, wow, we have a real powerhouse strength here in manufacturing. And whilst we've lost a number of industries to offshoring, there's an opportunity for us to think about advanced manufacturing and reshoring capabilities in a way that many other countries are struggling to grapple with. And I think now is our finest hour in our ability to be able to so very quickly turn on the tap and make that connectedness, whether it's with Michael Stewart and ICN connecting the requirements of demand and supply, whether it's companies like Evolve with Ty that can very quickly retool, and with the connectedness between Shay and Bill to coordinate that effort, is why we're seeing probably probably one of the times I know that in government, we've been able to actually take a deep breath. We know that we're able to get the supply lines moving and connect to where the most need and the demand is. We're still seeing really early stage response conversations happening across Australia in various tiers of government. But I do feel as though now we're starting to see not just the response, but the recovery activations being put in place. Craig asked me today to talk not just about what's happening in Queensland, because that can really be spoken to deeply between Shay and Bill and DSD, but at a higher order globally, we're starting to see the movement from supply chains to an understanding of risk chains. No greater has that risk been prevalent than now, particularly for supply chains around critical lines, so food and medical equipment, particularly around COVID. So we're starting to understand now supply chains also have to factor risk, and that risk has typically been highlighted around, say, environment and climate, and or availability to raw materials and resources. But now we're even seeing risk being recalibrated in ways that we can fire up those 3D printers to enable us under a digital rights management to have the authority to print what was once a priority design or a proprietary design into something that's more open and open innovation, which is probably where Tony sort of digs in. Three really large pieces of activations that are underway. There's activations between the OECD, the World Health Organization, the WHO, and the World Economic Forum. And the three things that are underway is quickly enabling an entire world network for 3D printing companies. So just like we have connected here in very small clusters, that's happening internationally at mass scale with companies like HP Inc. being involved. And so that's really interesting in not just only the response of the need now, but it will have a paradigm shift into how the future of manufacturing will start to enable localized last mile production for something that was rather guarded as a proprietary right into large global companies. The second big piece is the WHO, which we've never really seen them interact in this way before. They've always been in the spotlight when it comes to Davos and the World Economic Forum, but they're actively now becoming involved using large data sources, the connectedness of distributed manufacturing globally. So the WHO are starting to put not only the data muscle behind who's getting sick, when and where, and where's the timeline for vaccines, but they're also now looking at supply chain enablement, which is the first time we've seen this at a mass global scale. The WHO have typically been involved in geographical needs, particularly around Ebola as a prime example, but they have put an entire technical army together with the World Economic Forum to address this global materials supply chain. We've never seen that before. So that, to me, from a global perspective, if I think about what we're doing here, that's being mirrored and amplified globally in a far greater fidelity than ever before.
Thanks for that, Leanne. And that global, it's interesting as you mentioned the kind of the global collaborations that are happening, reflecting a bit of the local as well. And I'm interested in, as we head over to Mike, I understand obviously you've been doing a lot of work as far as the ICN and the portal, and how do we make that process more efficient? And what is the role of making the whole procurement process more efficient in supporting some of these collaborations that we're talking about? Because we can think about, barriers that might exist. And to what extent has that portal kind of almost come to bear? Like, it was there obviously beforehand, but now all of a sudden it has a spotlight. So maybe a bit of background on the portal and kind of what you've seen as far as the impact.
Yeah, great, Chad. Thanks very much. I mean, certainly I've put a little bit of a slide pack together just to demonstrate a couple of things, but in theory, the response time has been absolutely critical in terms of engaging with suppliers, and also just that interface for us to be able to forward information through in an agile environment through to the various different task teams that have been created by Queensland government. So I'll jump onto this, and then hopefully that will make a bit more sense in terms of where we're going with this. Okay, so just quickly, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of ICN and the online procurement services, which are the two elements that fall within QMI Solutions. The ICN has been around for about 25 odd years. It was since inception, it's had over $30 billion worth of contracts awarded through it, and certainly that that speaks volumes. Over $300 billion worth of opportunities have been listed, 12,000 supply searches per month, and about 160,000 page views per month. So without going too deeply into it, we can already see the benefit in terms of the reach of the portal, and how we can engage rapidly with a national supply chain. In 2018-19, I've just put brought a couple of stats in. Close to $1.7 billion worth of contracts were awarded to Australian companies through the process, and over 5,000 new companies were registered on the ICN Gateway in a single year.
Mike, are you sharing your screen? Sorry to interrupt. Are you sharing your screen?
Yeah, are you not seeing it?
No.
It's showing me that I am. I'm not too sure. Let's try again.
Bingo. Well done.
Right, so I'm just trying to see. So just making sure that you can see the right one. Are you seeing, which one are you seeing? The first one or the second one? Are you seeing the small part or the second part? It doesn't really matter.
QMI Solutions Empowering Business, Michael Swart, Executive Director. Bingo.
Yep. Okay, so we'll just get back to the slide that we were at. So in terms of registrations of interest from local businesses over a single year, we can see that it's about 54,000 odd responses to various different opportunities that have been put up on the ICN Gateway, and that certainly is a clear indication again of the responsiveness of suppliers that come on to our portal. ICN Queensland, if we're being more specific in terms of a demographic, we are a member of the national network. As I mentioned, we're part of QMI Solutions in Queensland. We certainly assist Australian manufacturing industry in terms of engaging with primes and the like, and matching capability with requirements. And certainly in today's environment, that's certainly playing a massive role. And we also assist projects in meeting the Queensland Government Charter for Local Content and the Queensland procurement policy. We've also got a commercial arm to that as well, and we engage with commercial projects on a case-by-case basis, and that is actively supported by Queensland Government as well. So again, I suppose if you like, we're the e-harmony between suppliers and major projects. That's not my little phrase, but it's one that I've adopted because I think it's apt. But we have two elements to it. We've got the ICN Gateway, which is the medium, that's the interface, and then we've also got the BBF, which is the Indigenous Supplier Portal, which has got about 600 odd Indigenous suppliers in Queensland alone. On our consultancy services side, certainly from a local industry perspective, we've got a massive footprint in terms of the Queensland demographic, and nationally through the national network. We also do market research, and again, this is where our values certainly come into play in today's world, where we're able to look at capability and the supply market analysis on various different suppliers that are able to supply various different mediums. Some of those are back-end searches, some of those are out on the project page, which I'll show you shortly, which Queensland Government have put up. In terms of specialized events, certainly we are proactive in terms of changing our business as usual to online, and we're doing industry briefings and workshops and the like, all through the Zoom medium, which we're on today. And again, that just showcases the agility in terms of not only just us, but in terms of industry as a whole, how we've had to adapt really, really quickly to the current environment. As I mentioned, the front end is the interface, and that's the ICN gateway. Suppliers can create a new company profile. So we've made it really easy. There's a wizard that suppliers can come on and register through. And that certainly is a medium that we then utilize to interrogate various different company profiles so that we can identify capability within their profile and previous project experience. The suppliers can log in to an existing company profile. They can search for project and supply opportunities. There's also an automated process of notification where suppliers are notified when an opportunity comes up. So for example, the COVID-19 response page that we've put up both nationally and within Queensland, we send out bursts of requests for information, which suppliers can respond to and in real time. And buyers can also search for suppliers in a B2B sort of environment. These are some of the clients that we've worked with over the last 36 months. This is not to crow about ourselves, but really just to showcase that we have got the capability to be able to work in various different environments. In response to today's conversation, I suppose this is where it becomes apt that ICN has a vital role from both a national as well as a state perspective in terms of working with governments and local industry to match the demand against the capability and assist with those supply chain shortages. And we've seen this, for example, in sanitizers and in face masks and you know, various other elements of PPE. These are the two project pages that we've put up. The left one is the national project page, and that is where suppliers can come on. And there's also references to various other initiatives, including the federal side, including statewide, as well as ANGC as an example. So we certainly are collaborative from the sense of trying to take the noise out of the whole environment, because at the moment there's a lot of information that's going out, and at times I think suppliers can get very confused as to who in fact they should be engaging with. So we're trying to be that one-to-all. In terms of the Queensland government, they've instructed us to put up a COVID-19 manufacturing supply chain support project page, and this project page has got about 15 or 16 odd opportunities at the moment. So we're supporting Queensland government at the point of contact for suppliers who are able to provide necessary COVID-19 supplies, as listed in the work packages on the left. And that's growing. Every day we're getting 2 to 3 packages. So we certainly are seeing a massive, you know, sort of increase in the requirement. We're educating suppliers, and we're the interface in terms of educating suppliers in terms of TGA, ISO approvals, as well as AUNZ standard requirements. And in fact, I had a company the other day who happened to produce millions and millions of masks in Sri Lanka, and they've got an office here, but they weren't TGA approved, and it just showcased again to them the requirement to be able to register on that, but then also flick through the information through to the task team that in turn then I believe has been in touch with that particular company. We've also been feeding information through to the task teams on a daily basis in terms of transformation of companies that have got a skill set that can be adapted to today's environment. A typical example of that, and Shay and I had a chat, and in fact this company was on the ABC with Shay the other night, where they've adapted their current business as usual, which is car wash chemicals, to produce antibacterial hand rub. It's those sort of initiatives that we're seeing time and time again that's really starting to gain a lot of momentum. And you'll see from the graph down the bottom, and this has only been up for just over a week and a half, we've certainly seen some incredible growth in terms of responsiveness from the supply chain into these various different initiatives. The other one that I'm really excited about is and again, this just shows our agility. I'm not crying about us, but I am. And this is certainly something that I'm really excited about. This is a mental health and wellbeing check-in app got nothing to do with our business as usual. So we had to be the forerunners in terms of showcasing that we are adaptable. So we partnered with our technology partner Onyx to actually create this app that has gone out free to all companies with less than 50 people, which again is all about helping companies to automate the daily check-in of staff, as well as from a mental health and well-being perspective, and checking in with the destination location if the staff member is going out to site or is going to go and do a delivery or whatever the case might be. It's all about just making sure that we do the right thing in terms of our workforce. And that's had a great response to it. The next part of our business is the online procurement services, and that's the portal that was created about 4 odd years ago. And you know, again, because it's a modular system, we can adapt it to suit the requirements, and it can be deployed really rapidly. And we're looking at a couple of opportunities at the moment, which I think will come to fruition, where we are certainly seeing that there is a need for an agile system that can be adapted quickly. And it's also has got an integration with ICN Gateway. So I think it's probably the only procurement system that I know of that's got over 80,000 odd suppliers nationally. Which kind of speaks volumes. So it's got a full supplier onboarding functionality, et cetera, and you can put out quickly RFQs and RFTs out to the market. So again, response time is where this has been a focal point. These are portal examples of the same mechanism that's used by the likes of Shell and Rio, and so it's a tried and tested medium, which we are able to adapt to suit today's requirements. I mentioned earlier on in terms of the integration with ops and with ICN, sorry, and that is again to have an exposure to national suppliers, especially in today's world. We're able to actually pinpoint where those suppliers are demographically by creating an RFQ and RFT, and it again just gives us that snapshot before we even put it out to the market, whether there are any suppliers in the region that are able to actually engage with in terms of this. The other critical element is data analytics, and certainly from that perspective, there's a dashboard, and again, it's easy to use, it's intuitive. We don't need to go through a full training program to be able to get people on board, and it's adaptable to suit. And again, this is an example of a particular EOI or an RFQ or RFT that's been created. On the left-hand side, you've got examples of suppliers that have been identified in this particular category that we're looking for, and we can see that that we've got a global supply chain, and this is just indicative, but it does showcase it. So in terms of that, that's kind of where we're at. And I'm sorry, Todd, Chad, I'm over a minute, but I hope that kind of wraps it up in a nutshell.
Oh, Mike, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. A very impressive system, just huge numbers, been going a long time. And to be able to improve the response time and really be a resource for businesses. You know, as we get into the Q&A, and please, for those who are attending and watching, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. Thank you for those who have put a few in there, and feel free to upvote other ones as you see it. But I do want to get into kind of and touching on something as far as Leanne said as well, as far as the rapid advances Queensland has made, but also maybe saying, well, are there any gaps in that as well? And you know, is it for everyone, and how what does it extend to? So I want to get a little bit more into that in the Q&A, because we have a platform, we have manufacturers we'll talk to, but there's also a obviously need for collaboration, and that's a big word that we've been hearing in this crisis. And Leanne even mentioned the concept of distribution and distributed networks, which Shay, I understand that's kind of a place that you play in quite specifically. Is how do we get all these pieces working together? You know, whether it's into the funnel of the platform that Michael was just sharing about, connecting with the individual manufacturers. So maybe just share a little bit for about 5 minutes on kind of who you are, what you do, and your take on it.
Excellent. Sure. That's a favorite topic of mine, collaboration. I really believe that that's the key to our future success, and also to enable innovation in our area. So I'm Shay. I am a woman of many hats. One of those hats is that I'm one of the directors of QMI, of the companies that Mike was talking about. we're actually, all of those programs that Mike was discussing is housed in QMI, and we're a not-for-profit that's here to elevate the industry. So the demonstration of the COVID app that was developed and deployed within a week and available free to our small businesses is an example of how we're here to support industry as best we can. I also run an engineering consulting company in the manufacturing space. I'm on the Manufacturing Ministers Advisory Council for the state government, and currently wearing the hat of the COVID supply task force. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. I'd just like to comment on a number of things. I guess where we were maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago was looking at how we as a state can really respond to the needs. How can we activate our manufacturing community to be there to support what our needs are in both the health PPE and also in the supply chain in general. And I guess it's been such a fast moving beast that it's required the team to really move so rapidly and be trying to predict where we're going in the future. So step forward 3 weeks and there's probably about 30 or 40 manufacturing projects that Bill's team is working on within state development to really elevate manufacturers to retool and supply the supply chain. But one of the things that's been interesting during the conversations that I've been having is there's probably 2 key areas, I think. One of them is really around the requirements, particularly from a PPE perspective when you're talking health systems, and what that means from a TGA perspective, what that means from a regulatory perspective. There's so many people who are trying to help, and that's phenomenal, and we want to support them to do so. But we need to do it in a way that's controlled and meets the requirements of the regulators. I just think it's important for people to understand that these are medical devices and they have inherent risk to the user. And one example is masks that have been recalled across Europe. There's millions and millions of masks that have been recalled from hospital usage because they were defective. So it's really important that when we're going through this transition that we really account for the safety and efficacy of these products, because we need to remember that they are in fact medical devices. And I saw one of the questions in the Q&A was around how we should consider the environmental impact. And I think that's a really good question, because one of the things that concerns me is that there's a lot of products being produced that don't actually meet the standards for the regulatory requirements and won't be able to be sold here unless the regulatory environment changes, if we become in a more desperate position. The flip side of that is we also can't export them. So we've got people making products that weren't able to be used, and what's the environmental impact on that? So key focus when you're trying to help, that's why it's important engaging through systems like ICN, because you can see what the requirements are, you can see what we need, what the products are that we need, and what the requirements are to manufacture them. So that's a really important thing to consider. The second thing I'd like to talk about is the concept of collaboration. One thing that's enabled us to move really quickly is getting people to collaborate. So manufacturers generally have their core business, and if you combine them with other manufacturers whose core business also complements what they're trying to achieve, it's a really quick way to get new products to market. So we've connected a number of different manufacturers. You might have an injection molder who's connected with a filter media manufacturer, and together they can actually make a product. And then you combine them with a medical device manufacturer and their regulatory approval, all of a sudden you've got a product that can be approved. So I'm really passionate about connecting the right people together to achieve the right outcomes. So if you're in this space and working on this, reach out to your community. Don't think, oh, I want to make this product, so I'm going to do all the things that I need to make it. I'm going to machine and stamp and mold and build and sterilize. Look to your community. We've got a fabulous community here in Queensland, and look to them. See how you can leverage their expertise and their skills to get to the end goal, to get the product to market. And I think this is a skill that we need to exercise, not just in today's emergency, but it's a really clever way to operate. It's one way that we can actually differentiate globally. If we work together and focus on our core skills and expertise and leverage those around us, then it actually gives us a really good differentiator on a global playing field. The third thing that is actually quite interesting is really watching the speed at which this digital transformation is occurring. I think it's just happened at such a phenomenal pace, both in manufacturing and just in our general operations. But one of the biggest challenges in our journey to advance manufacturing and Industry 4.0 is the resistance of change to that technology and the disruption that it causes to the business. So all of a sudden, it's like ripping off a Band-Aid. Us and our entire ecosystem has embraced digital transformation. And I think this is really, really important for us to understand and leverage, because we've embraced this digital transformation, and that is the core hindrance to being able to embrace advanced manufacturing and Industry 4.0, the Internet of Things, everything that really is digitization of the factory floor. So I'd like to see us moving forward leverage this newfound embracing of digital transformation and leverage it, make sure it's in the factory floor, that we have the capability to be able to manage our factories remotely. Let's see how we can leverage this change and make it our catalyst for that transformation.
Excellent. Some fantastic points there, Shay. You know, and there's even stuff that came up in our conversation yesterday, which Ty and Tony could probably speak to towards the end of this. You know, definitely around the requirements, needing things to be safe, because we can produce a lot of stuff, as you say. You know, and to Craig's question in the Q&A, you know, what is the environmental impact from this? You know, definitely the need for collaboration. And interested in your thoughts after this, as far as, you know, what are those go-to points for a manufacturer, maybe even some of the smaller ones? How do they connect in with this network? And then that third one, you know, and it comes to that point where we're manufacturing and we're investing a lot now, but what are we investing in that's going to build that sustainability ongoing, building that remote capability, the automation capability, taking advantage of this current opportunity. Would that be fair?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when you talk about the longevity too. One thing as a manufacturing community, what's important to us is continuity in our orders. If we know we have orders moving forward, we can invest in technology, we can invest in people, we can invest in apprenticeships. So when you don't have that long-term visibility of what your orders look like, that's when we play it's a really hard game. And one thing that we're doing as we're working with a lot of these manufacturers is connecting them with the people that need the products and empowering them to look at long-term product arrangements and long-term orders. Because what that means is that we're not just setting them up for this time period where there's a really immense need, but we're empowering them and giving them a longer period of time to really optimize their processes, to be both competitive from a cost perspective and also to optimize their technology so that they can be competitive and differentiating from a technical perspective as well. So I think really manufacturing doesn't respond well when you have short-term small orders. It's really difficult to innovate in that space. So looking at what our policy levers are around ensuring that we have that local procurement and a little bit more control over what we're actually selling locally is critically important.
Thanks for that, Shay. And you mentioned policy, which I think is a good segue to have a bit of a yarn with Bill. From regards to the state perspective, Bill, very keen to hear your thoughts as far as the DSD response and some of the processes within Queensland that you see both current, and are there any changes, innovations, transformations that you see even as a result of the current COVID-19 impacts?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, and pleased to talk to everyone today. I suppose from our point of view, I'm actually representing quite a large team here. The Department of State Development, if we're talking innovation and cultural change, it has been amazing how people across the department, across the state, our staff across the state have swung in to help in this situation. And I'd just like to acknowledge the effort they've put in. Basically, as a department, we've taken a two-pronged approach. First is the business-to-business stuff. We're aware that a lot of businesses are suffering with this. They're having their supply chains disrupted. And so Michael has already spoken to that, but that business-to-business side. and there's also been a bit of business counselling that's been going through there. The part that I've mainly been involved in is in terms of ensuring supply for Queensland Government to meet our needs in coping with the crisis, our being the state's needs, particularly with Queensland Health and their needs, but also more broadly with those forward-facing agencies that we have, like police, corrective services, ambulance, some of the ones that spring immediately to mind, but also we've found big demand for personal protective equipment from agencies like communities where they're doing aged care visits or children in care and so on. So it's been a learning exercise to sort of get a handle on just how much the Queensland Government is dealing on the face-to-face basis with the community. So our approach was to speak to Queensland Health initially, find out what their priorities were. They came back with a list of personal protective equipment, or PPE, that they thought saw as an initial requirement. That was hand sanitizer, face masks, which Ty got involved in, and he can probably talk to later on, gowns, face shields, gloves, ventilators. Since that time, our colleagues in the Department of Housing and Public Works went out across the government more broadly to identify other things. So things like hand wipes, protective eyewear, coveralls, the hazmat suits, that stuff came up from other agencies. But also the big thing Housing and Public Works did for us, was to actually quantify what was required. So out of that, we know that we need 780,000 litres of hand sanitizer over the next 6 months. So being able to go to companies and say, hey, actually, we need this much, has been a great bonus, and certainly we can then get down to some serious conversations. So each of those things I just outlined required different approaches. Gloves, for example, we found out fairly quickly are not manufactured in Australia. We learned things ourselves. I didn't realise just how difficult gloves are to manufacture, but they are, and they aren't made here. So we sought out importers, which we passed on to Housing and Public Works and Queensland Health to get orders in quickly, so we were able to tell the other agencies that these products weren't available, tell them quickly and ask them to pursue different approaches. I should point out at this stage, although our focus has been on finding manufacturers, we're not the procuring agencies. Queensland Health is buying for health needs. Housing and Public Works are generally buying across the government for things that are in broad demand, like face masks and face shields, and then individual agencies are procuring for their for those smaller needs, like the protective eyewear, where there are only actually 2 agencies that were after that. So I suppose a number of things have come through. There has to be a cultural shift, or there has been a cultural shift within procuring agencies. We are something of a throwaway society, and I think health, for reasons of sterile environments, etc., is particularly prone to throw things away. And I'm sure Shay can comment on this, but getting health to have the idea that you would launder gowns rather than wear them once and throw them away is an adjustment. Additionally, the area I've been dealing most with is hand sanitizer. They were just putting out hand sanitizer. I have learned, and we're constantly learning, 2 grades of hand sanitizer. There's a clinical grade, which is over 80% and manufactured to TGA requirements, etc. And then there are the non-clinical grades, which are sort of 60% and up. Health, we're going, give everybody clinical grade, and we'll put it out in waiting rooms and whatever. When in fact, and then they came to us and said, hang on a sec, we've got a shortage of the clinical grade hand sanitizer. We helped them with that shortage, and hope, fingers crossed, we fixed it. But also health themselves had to go through a process of saying the clinical grade gets put aside for clinical use. The non-clinical stuff can go into waiting rooms and on counters and so on. And overall, and I'll say this to everyone listening, washing your hands with soap and water is the best thing to do. It's superior to hand sanitizer, but for those people who can't get to soap and water, hand sanitizer is the next best thing. So there was a cultural change within health and other agencies in terms of sort of the free usage of hand sanitizer. It was almost a toilet paper effect. So they had to rein that in. When it came to hand sanitizer, as I said, that's been the one I've been most closely related with. We identified quite a number of companies who could manufacture hand sanitizer. We then quickly found that the biggest impediment was ethanol for hand sanitizer. And so we immediately started targeting the companies, particularly, and I'll mention them by name, Wilmar and Manildra, who supply ethanol, and subsequently also the Dolby biorefinery. Working with them, they have a number of orders. They also have their own issues. We were able to ask them to reprioritise their production, their orders, so that they could give priority to health-related products. And I have to say they were both very open to that. Additionally, Bundaberg Rum, Diageo, the parent company of Bundaberg Rum, donated 100,000 litres of ethanol to Queensland, to the Queensland government, specifically for use in the health sector and more broadly across Queensland Health. We were able to then connect that donation up with contractors already supplying to Queensland Health and boost the production there. Similarly, Beanley Rum started producing ethanol and their own hand sanitizer, and again we connected that supply into the Queensland government. And a big shout out also for the distilling sector in Queensland. If we're talking about pivoting, Queensland's distilling sector, there's 28 distillers in the state, small ones. They many of them are award-winning, I have to say. We have a very good distilling sector, making spirits out there. They turned around and started producing hand sanitizer very quickly, and they're continuing to do so, and they are working with the brewing industry. The brewing industry is making what's called a wash, which is about 18% pure, 18% alcohol. The reason for that is it's then easier to distill higher grades of alcohol if you're starting from a high base. Additionally, when the Dolby biorefinery restarted, and they were producing 24,000 litres, or will be producing 24,000 litres a day of what's called technical alcohol or technical ethanol, which is it's contaminated with fusel oil. It smells of turpentine, even though it's 80% pure ethanol. So there are some issues about using it. We were able to connect them up with the Distillers Association. That's being broken down. The distillers are then redistilling that up to around 95% pure ethanol, taking the fusel oil out of it, and that's then going into the hand sanitizer and cleansers that are being done there. So it's been interesting to see how that sector in particular has turned to producing essentially a brand new product for them in a remarkably short space of time. We're literally talking 2 to 3 weeks. I'll probably leave it there, but I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks for that, Bill. It's a fantastic overview as far as you say, some of the transformation across the different areas from PPE to hand sanitizer to, and I've seen some questions in the Q&A as far as actual materials and gowns and things like that as well, which we can touch on. I know, Janine, you were asking that question as far as uniforms, first responders, and even that being a bit of an option to look at. And again, some of the questions that are coming through here is, well, what do we do with the waste afterwards? Circular economy and some of those kind of conversations. Before we get into the Q&A, I wouldn't mind just asking Tony and Ty just briefly within a couple of minutes to kind of introduce yourself and who you do, what you do. We'll start with yourself, Tony, as far as maybe looking after some of the other manufacturers that may or may not be within some of the sectors here we're talking about and how we coordinate those, much like the work that Shay does. Then we'll hand over to Ty to hear a bit around Evolve.
Okay, cool. So yeah, just very quickly, Tony Wheeler, CEO and founder of ImagineX Ventures. So my background is actually working in the startup space and scaling companies, but actually about building collaborative ecosystems. And I've done that across Australia and internationally. Got involved in this agenda a couple of weeks ago, where I was approached by a number of the rapid manufacturing, the 3D printing and the laser cutting type fraternity, and saying, we all want to do something, we want to contribute, we want to help. And got into these chat forums, and a number of them, about 4 or 5 I think I'm across at the moment, and they're all doing the same thing, which is basically just trying to be really cool tech nerds and just create amazing things and come up with solutions. But as someone's pointed out before, and I see it in the chat, it's like, we actually don't know what the demand was. And then you're actually talking about supply chain, logistics, and integration. So literally in about the last 4 days, we've spun up a new platform, which we've called Open Manufacturing Alliance Australia, which is basically pulling together all of the, or asking small, medium manufacturers, particularly in the rapid manufacturing space, to say, right, what can you do? What can you contribute? And how do we actually do this as a collaborative effort? Some of the chat rooms are actually saying, we see things like the ICN portal, we see things like the Australian Advanced Manufacturing one, there's another one for Buy Queensland, there's multiple ones, but it's overwhelming for them. And most of the stuff is actually set up for major projects or Queensland government procurement. There's thousands of other people out there in medical centres, frontline workers, and everything else who don't access those types of processes. So just in that 4 days, what we've had created and signed up, there's now 280 makers and manufacturers have put their details on the page. We know with like this face shields, that gives us about 75,000 a week manufacturing capability, but we can't find where to actually put it. And that's the message that we keep getting from all these individuals. In terms of the complete logistics supply chain, we've now got a process in place where we've got manufacturers. We've actually aligned with logistics companies for last mile delivery, but also freight across the country. We actually have got the, lost the word, sanitization, I've forgotten the right word, sterilization processes in there. And also in the last couple of days, we started talking to the recyclers, because a lot of the single-use PPE activities are going to have to actually get recycled in some way, because as you said, there's throwaway. So we've built an end-to-end process, and we've been talking to other people about how do we build this as a post-apocalyptic, also decentralized manufacturing ecosystem with all the pieces that go in there. But it's been incredibly difficult sort of figuring out what is actually the demand, have the conversation, and it's just, and so that's what we're getting called on from the group, that it's almost like, I guess, we're representing today, is actually say, how do we work with the likes of ICN, with Shay, with the people and Bill, the people who are actually making the decisions, setting the demand up and having a conversation, because most procurement officers are not actually used to working with a decentralized manufacturing capability. They just want to deal with one company, one site, one location, and everything's simple. So we're actually saying, I think like Leanne said right at the beginning, this is the direction that the world is going, that we're actually looking at swarm manufacturing, we're looking at decentralized manufacturing, and we're actually creating a platform about that. We need to understand how to rapidly work with the existing systems, because we've got a massive capability sitting here that's basically saying, just point us in a direction, tell us where to go, press go, and we want to do it. We're just not quite sure how.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tony.
For the moment.
Yeah, It is a conversation we had a bit yesterday as far as how we mobilize all of that. But Ty, you, especially over the last couple of weeks, you've been able to move a whole bunch of things around, if not mountains, in order to make some pretty significant change. Maybe a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what your experience has been like over the last couple of weeks, just in a few minutes.
My name's Ty. I make plastic stuff and now I make masks. So pretty straightforward. Yeah, we've pivoted. Our business, every product we get involved in is new. So it's not unlike us to get involved in, biting off more than you think you can chew, and then just chew like hell. And learning lessons every time. Most projects are like that. But normally you move into a supply chain where someone has a known requirement, and you would think that people would know that they need something right now, but they know they need something. But what's been very difficult, and as Shay touched on, as a manufacturer, you need to know what you're building. And we know we're building a bunch of different products at the moment, but what's been very, very difficult is to get firm commitments. And that's very challenging. And what Tony's saying there, there's a bunch of people ready to point and shoot, and there's a lot of capability, and there's a lot of people who can move extremely fast, even faster than us. But no one's actually, or there's very few people making a call and saying, we need, 200,000 of this, or 2 million, or 20 million of this. It's these daily conversations about no one actually putting their neck on the line and just making a call, and a call which I don't think is actually that risky. You're not rolling the dice on this. If someone went and purchased 20 million of something, they're going to get used. If they get used this year or next year, who cares? But I'd rather be looking at it than looking for it. And unfortunately, I don't think people are making those calls right now. And from a manufacturing, I need to know what my next 3 months of pipeline look like at a minimum. We've seen this in the last 3 weeks. We're trying to break into global supply chains where you've got countries of hundreds of millions of people or billions of people, and little old Australia's trying to knock on the door with their 25 million people and wanting to be taken seriously. So we've had to do some exceptional things to break into those supply chains, and a lot of that's come down to relationships, which a lot of other manufacturers in Australia just don't have. Yeah, if someone could come along and give us the next 12 months worth of purchase orders, fantastic. 6 months would be amazing. 3 months right now would be a godsend. And anything short of that's pissing in the wind, to be honest.
Thanks for that, Ty. And so I might just open it up to the panel a bit, both how we engage with across the manufacturers. And Shay, one of the points you were saying as far as the continuity and the forecast of orders, which it could then invest in building greater capability, but it's a bit of the chicken and the egg.
It's really hard. I think that's been one of the biggest challenges, like Ty's touched on. It's one thing that's really important from a manufacturing perspective is knowing your requirements and knowing your quantities. And once you know those two things, you can figure everything else out. Our manufacturers are innovative as hell. They can figure out what they need to do, what machines they need, how they need to be set up. But in the absence of knowing quantity and in the absence of knowing requirements, that is a very difficult job. And so I think it's challenging when we're in situations like this. That is a symptom of very long supply chains. It's a symptom of complexity in the supply chain that the purchasers don't understand. You can't ask the purchasers in a long supply chain what their requirements are, because they don't know the requirements that are actually useful to somebody who's going to make it. It's a huge disconnect. You've got people purchasing products from distributors who came from a distributor, who came from some other place, that the manufacturer is so far away from the purchaser that we've lost touch with what our needs are and why we have the specifications that we have. So I completely empathize with what Ty's saying, and it's been one of our most significant challenges. But I think as far as moving forward, it's about really understanding why we have requirements for the products that we do, and really like shortening the supply chain so that you shorten that complexity and reduce that risk. The longer a supply chain is and the less you know about it and the less you know about your products, the more risk you hold as a purchaser. So by being closer to your manufacturers, it gives you greater agility, and it allows you to meet your needs and actually truly assess what your needs are. So it's a challenge that we're working through, but it's of the supply chains that we've created.
Yeah. And are the things about like the COVID-19 impact, are the things that are going to be changing so that we can actually shorten those supply chains? Like, are the things that are happening now which will have an impact on how businesses run in the future, so we can address some of these things, which at the moment are just kind of sitting there saying, well, they're complex without necessarily a solution?
Reshoring.
Yeah, they have to.
Buy locally.
It's a policy lever, though. It has to be a policy.
Absolutely.
One of the biggest things in our innovation space, we've got some phenomenal innovators in medical technology. I work with 30 companies across the country who are innovating novel technology. And one of the biggest complaints that I get is that, well, one, we really do support innovation, so they can get good funding to innovate, but they can't get anybody to buy it within Australia. And that is what we need to change. This whole, our purchasing system is not set up for a one-man band innovator, somebody who's got, it doesn't matter if your product is going to save time, increase quality, save money, and increase patient and or user satisfaction. Those things don't matter when you're only supplying one product into a supply chain that's used to, they only deal with really large procurement suppliers. So I think looking at how we can bridge that gap between the innovation that we're creating and the purchaser, because the thing that sits in the middle of that is the manufacturing. Where we lose them is we get the innovation, they find a purchaser overseas, so that manufacturing goes overseas. But if we find local purchasers and keep the manufacturing here, then you can go global from there. And you've already put your roots in from a manufacturing perspective here locally. So it's something from the ecosystem that we need to change. And the only way to change that is looking at our local procurement policies.
I agree, Shay. And if I could make a couple of comments there too. I've had some discussions with some of the more senior people in health, and you know, we build submarines here, and we pay a premium for that defence. This is kind of defence on another level. It's all about protecting the population. And we've had these sort of discussions about increasing our self-reliance, that you can't basically, the world can't rely on a single manufacturer out of Wuhan to supply all the face masks in the world. Basically, countries are going to have to become more self-reliant, particularly in this PPE type equipment, and probably they will have to stockpile, which means they're going to have to get into longer term orders. Stockpiling won't work for hand sanitizer, I should say, because it does have a use-by date. But also there will be a premium to pay for that stockpiling and that local manufacturer, and essentially governments and the community are going to have to recognise that there is a premium to pay and be prepared to pay it.
I think that's spot on, Bill, and that's a short-term premium. Now we're going through that at the moment. We know that the supply chains for, and if I talk specifically about respirators, the supply chains at the moment are totally upside down. You've got a country like China and other places that are charging whatever they want for the raw materials, and they know they can, and they're taking that while they can. But longer term, when products are designed correctly and when processes are designed and equipment's designed correctly, we can manufacture in Australia cheaper than offshore with the right support. And that doesn't come down to tariffs and all the rest of it. You know, we make plastic stuff here cheaper than offshore every day. We do it, and it's nothing to do with tariffs. But having that support and those policies about, you know, buying local and things like that first, what that actually can also do is not just force people to do it. It actually introduces them to local supply chains, and then through working with local manufacturers, they realise that people like us help them with not only their initial product development, but ongoing continual improvement of those products and keeping their products relevant. You know, when you buy stuff from China, you don't get any help. You get a cheap price, you get a cheap product, and you get shit house food when you go over there. When you buy locally, you get someone who's engaged in your business, who continually helps you on that continual improvement front, which can actually make your business and your product stronger. But certainly, I think the best thing that will come out of this is the fact that people will have to get involved with local manufacturing. I think it's fantastic for everyone in the supply chain, because it's giving us the opportunity to get in front of people that would never actually taken our call last week. which is really cool.
Absolutely. I completely agree, Ty. I had a manufacturer that did silicone injection molding for me, and I had one in Australia, and then I also had one in Asia. And the Australian guys called up one day and said, "Hey, Shay, I reckon we could actually reduce your part cost by 30% if we invest in this robotic arm to pull them out of the mold. What do you reckon? Do you reckon we should do that?" And and I said, "Of course, let's reduce the part cost by 30%. I said, "What do you need from me to do that?" "All we need is to know that we'll get orders for the next 12 months and we can amortize the cost of that optimization." I got a cheaper product. They got a more efficient process, but it's really about ensuring that they know they've got security. They can't invest if they don't have securities in their POs.
Yep, spot on.
Thanks. Well, thanks for that, Guy. It sounds like obviously we can keep having a chat for the next half hour, and I think within about another 30 minutes, I think we'd probably address this and get it solved with the people on the panel. It is the top of the hour. We are going to be wrapping up. I am conscious, thank you very much for participating. Leanne, I want to just hop over to you real quick, just as far as, like, obviously as a chief entrepreneur, you've seen a lot of different aspects in Queensland, and you did offer that kind of that global view. Just real quick as we wrap up, your perspectives on some of the conversations, some of the supply chain challenges that have been raised here, and how do we get more people engaged and involved?
So I think we've definitely need to be better at procurement and buy local. We're doing a great job of ensuring that's on every Twitter campaign, known to man, and ministers are championing that as a North Star, but we're yet to see true enablement around procurement in such a way that actually delivers those orders with continuity in place. So I think that will come, and hopefully that will be, and a deliberate intent to do so is certainly being championed. I do think this is going to be a global paradigm. We've already heard some of the prime ministers in other countries talking about localing and nationalising supply chains, and we're in the perfect position to do so quite quickly. We're an enriched state when we think about, even from our synthetic biology perspective, the work that we've been doing with the chief scientists, entirely new ways of thinking about material science will come to the forefront. So innovation, as Shay so rightly said, does sit in the supply, it sits in the front end of the supply chain, the back end of the supply chain. To bring us closer to the customer is really where where Amazon has led the world. So why isn't that good enough for when we think about supply chains, particularly here in Australia? We've got a lot of work to do. There's no doubt about it. And now is the time to start having the tough conversations. And let's not, they say that necessity is the mother of all inventions, but it shouldn't just be about COVID as to why this change is coming about. I would like to see it embedded. And maybe we should be asking ourselves the question, what do we need to stop doing to enabling this space to continuously improve? Yeah, absolutely. Definitely the supply chain challenges. Thank you very much, Leanne. We do need to wrap it up. But there are some questions in the Q&A that we will need to get to offline. Dave was asking things about the ICN, which Mike can help out with, and I know Tony, from as far as how the smaller manufacturers get engaged with that. Potentially you and Mike can engage there. Thank you very much, everybody, for participating. It's been a fantastic conversation, and I look forward to some of the outcomes of the relationships we make. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you. See you at 3:30, Shay.